Well, let's start with how to prioritize self-care in your life, because that has become something that's a non-negotiable for you because of your experience. So talk to me about your self-care story and where that started.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, self-care definitely looked different, much differently in the narcissistic marriage versus outside of it.
Yeah.
But towards the end of my 25 years with my ex-husband, who was an abusive narcissist, I actually got very ill. And doctors start with you don't feel good, you have symptoms, go to the family doctor. She honestly threw her arms in the air and said, I have no idea. It seems like you have stress or anxiety, but here's some Xanax, have fun with that. And she was a good doctor. I don't blame her. But then things got worse. Long and short of that is that, like anything else, I feel like we all have those things that aren't right. We know something's wrong, but you give it time. It'll work itself out. I'm able to push through it. I just need to rest, or you just think it's just going to magically go away. Well, unfortunately, a year later, it wasn't going away. I was experiencing about 24 different symptoms, and I started going to more doctors and mentioning it, to them. And and these were seemingly unrelated symptoms. For example, and this is going to be TMI. I'm sorry, people, but it was things from like my hands would just go numb for no reason, or they'd be I could just be sitting doing nothing and they would be in terrible pain. You think it might be arthritis, right? Well, I tested negative for rheumatoid arthritis. Then there was my digestive system. At one point, I went to the emergency room because I had not gone number 2 for 5 weeks. 5 weeks. It's a long time. My stomach was hurting. And I looked pregnant. I actually had people asking me if I was pregnant. And I was in so much agony. I couldn't go for anything. I had taken laxative, all this stuff. It's embarrassing, but it's like, okay, why was that happening? Why was I getting migraines? Why did I have a sore throat for 3 years straight? 3 years, no joke. I was having random fevers, heart palpitations, muscles stiffening if I sat for 10 minutes. So again, a normal person, try putting that puzzle together. Yeah. I couldn't make sense of it. One specialist after another, cardiologist did their tests. The, gastroenterologist did their thing. The neurologist examined me for MS. They were scanning my thyroid. Everybody found something but nothing, if that makes any sense. Yes. And everybody wanted to throw a pill at my symptoms.
Yes, but it's because they didn't.
Right. So I'm just very fortunate. And this is where I think it's important to share this aspect of the story, because we so often, and I'm not saying, again, not to trust your doctors, but, the gastroenterologist only understands the digestive system. And I'm not saying that they all are just, minimize it to that. But, you need a doctor that looks at your whole body and sees what's going on, and that will take the time. You have to be your own advocate to find that doctor. And yes, it's costly to pay the co-pays and take the time out of your work days to go do these things. But I am very fortunate that with all this talk about stress and anxiety, I got with a psychiatrist and a functional medicine doctor that he referred me to. And it turned out, lo and behold, after a few different consultations, ran some simple blood tests, sent them to Mayo Clinic. Cortisol. What is cortisol? It's a stress hormone. And cortisol, we could have a whole podcast about that. But cortisol, just for people to have a simple idea of what it is, it's a stress hormone. I say it's like the sister hormone to adrenaline, runs through you when you're in fight or flight mode. Yeah. But it also, and I think this is key for people to understand about these relationships as well, cortisol actually affects your attachment and your bonding to people with the way it interacts with your brain. So it is not just isolated to you're going through stress and this runs through you and wreaks havoc in your body. It is actually, like we talk about trauma bonds, cortisol is in fact a biological, chemical, part of that trauma bond situation. It's not just in your head. Your body is actually physically reacting to that constant push and pull, the trauma and then the love, and the trauma and the love. And it is, basically creating that connection to that person. But anyway, what cortisol did to me, it was running in my body at such high levels for so long because, the doctors are like, well, something is putting you under constant stress because my levels were 4 times higher than the highest level they should be. Nobody knew because, of course, anybody that's in an abusive situation knows, you don't go around talking about it. You don't want anyone to know for a million reasons, but mostly out of fear. You're afraid of what they'll think of you. You're afraid of exposing your abuser. You're afraid of what the consequence will be if it gets back to that person. Yeah. So they're like, what is causing you all this stress? Because your body thinks that there's some, invasive, virus or something that it had to eradicate, that it eradicated all the white blood cells, killed themselves off. I was having autoimmune reactions, all these random things, autoimmune. So now I had to deal with that. And then it turned out they did a few more neurological exams. It turned, and how this is a neurological thing, I have no idea. I'm not a doctor, but I have an upper respiratory syndrome, the scratchiness you hear in my voice. That's called upper airway resistance syndrome, which is a very rare lung syndrome. But guess what? It's common in victims of abuse. It's common. And it has those added aspects of depression, anxiety, muscular situations, digestive problems, heart problems, all these things that were happening to me. Upper airway resistance syndrome. So I would have never guessed that. And it was actually a sleep neurologist that found that because somehow it's classified as a sleep disorder, which I don't understand that either. But yes, that's why it takes some digging. It's like being a super sleuth to find out what's wrong. But once they found out what was wrong, that's when we could start going towards that, area of self-care that I hadn't really delved into prior to then, because if I had, I would have been in that situation.
Right.
So given what I was told, the doctors basically said, we have no pill, we have no surgery. The only thing that is going to save you. And literally at one point, my body was shutting down, just so people can understand. You can actually die of upper airway resistance syndrome. I was under a 50% risk of congestive heart failure. I was 93 pounds, by the way, because I had lost so much weight from the stress. So don't dismiss it if something like that happens, because, at 93 pounds, congestive heart failure doesn't make sense unless I had a heart disease.
Right.
So this was a very serious thing. I went home that night and I laid down and I remember thinking, this isn't what I want my life to be. I don't want it to just, that was it. It's going to be over. I'm just going to die one day. And this was it. There was more. I wanted what I saw other people had. I wanted a real marriage. I wanted love. I wanted to, grow older and watch my son graduate from school and get married and have his own kids. I mean, don't we all want those things? We want to live. Yeah. I just didn't want to live the life I was living.
Right.
And once I realized that is when I started to say, okay, nobody else has put me first. I was abused in my childhood. I had a mother who she hadn't wanted me when she was pregnant with me, didn't want me anymore after I was born. I was abused by her husband, who was not my biological father. Now I was in this, almost at the end of this 25-year marriage where I was loved sometimes and outright hated other times. So self-care had to turn into little things, because when you're in an abusive relationship, you're not allowed much. I wasn't allowed to have friends. He didn't allow me to talk on the phone in the house. He didn't like me on the computer. He didn't like me reading books. He didn't like me watching anything on TV unless he put it on. Everything was dictated. So I had to take the little crumbs that I could get. So I was waking up at 3 a.m. just so I could have peace while everybody else was asleep and the world was quiet. And if it was light out outside, because I live in the Midwest in the US, and well, during the winter, there's not so much light, but in the spring and summer and fall, I could go outside, maybe around 4 or 5 a.m. and I could take a walk and I could hear the birds chirp and I could hear the leaves rustle in the trees and I could breathe. I could just breathe and be. And, I've never been one that I could sit and meditate. It's just not my thing. I've always been more of I'm going to stay very, 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 very busy and until I'm dropped, and ready for sleep, because I have to distract myself from my life and all the chaos in it and the feelings and everything. So it was just nice to just be. And that was, for me, honestly, in that relationship, the ultimate act of self-care, because I couldn't speak my voice. I couldn't have an opinion. I could barely have feelings, because if anything, was reflected back as some offense to him, I'd pay the price. But in that time, on those walks in the morning and even in the winter, I would just go to my basement. We had a big basement. Air was cool. There was a TV, and I would just play like Candy Crush on my phone and walk around the perimeter of the room, as silly as that sounds. But just, it was just like, okay, I'm going to get my blood flowing. I'm just going to be clear. It was sort of my own form of meditation. So that's what I did for me. And I just had to start taking care of my body, like watching what I put into it. I'd always been a healthy eater anyway, but just being careful not to fill it with junk. I had to be very mindful about how I was taking care of myself, because my health and mental and physical was in the balance. So that's where self-care started. And then after, I think the ultimate act of self-care, though, was even before I got out of that relationship, was ending it. Because I think one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do in my life was taking that risk. And people say, oh, well, if he was so terrible and this and that, but it's not that easy to divorce somebody, because you have to understand. And again, I'm working on 2 more books that I'll release this year that explain more about this. But, having revealed some of what was happening in my childhood to some people, and there were child services involved in all that, I was sort of ostracized. Yeah. So, at this point in my life, my mother had completely dissociated from me, my stepfather as well, which no loss there. But, that mother wound is a very deep rejection, even though it's necessary, it's very deep. So my ex's family was my family. His mother was my mother. His sister was my sister. So it's not as easy to just say, oh, divorce him. It's necessary. He's abusive, because I was losing that whole family. Yeah. Did it have to be that way? No, but he's a narcissist. So of course he had already created this narrative about me, being a cheater and a liar and a this and a that. And, he actually admitted to me even that he told them lies about me, so to make sure they would hate me, because he was concerned that they liked me more than they liked him. So I was literally, within a year's time, I had lost everything. Literally, my parents, my husband, multiple families. It was the most devastating thing. But again, the ultimate act of self-care. This is how I describe this so people can understand. And I've used this in other podcasts. So if you've heard this before, I'm sorry, but it's so relevant. I always felt like I was like this little flower in this garden, but all these weeds had grown over me, overshadowing me. I couldn't see the sun. I wasn't getting sunshine. I wasn't getting the benefit of the rain. They were sucking the nourishment from the soil, and I was just withering away. I was just hiding and withering, and nobody could see me. And all these toxic people, once they started removing themselves from my life, or I was plucking them out myself, when all those weeds were gone, It's amazing what happens when you're nourished by the soil and you're getting sun shining down on you and you're feeling the rain and you can see that there's other flowers there too. And I'm blooming in all my colorful glory. And they're there, these other flowers, like, yes, come be with us. Be as colorful as we are. Open yourself up to the world, just like we're opening up. I'd never seen those flowers before. I didn't know that I could do that until they showed me that I could. And that's sort of what happened when I removed all these people. And so as awful as it was, and the mourning that I went through, and I still am very sad by those losses, but it was necessary to save myself.
Yeah. It's confidently setting boundaries. You decided you were worth it. You needed to save yourself. There was no other road. If you were going to be able to be healthy, to stay alive, and to be authentically you. And I the bravery and courage that had to take for you to do that. But it's so powerful when you because when you talk about being able to breathe, and even the simple acts that you found in the relationship to get a breath, those things were a form of meditation. That nature is
absolutely.
Nature is powerful. And I'm so glad you spoke to that. And even when you were talking about being in the basement, the freedom of choice is powerful. When you don't have much agency, any little thing that you can choose for yourself feels freeing and powerful. So the fact that you were able to find those windows, I would say, is probably why you did get out, why you didn't end up there and possibly losing your life, because you were able to find those little windows. But then you were able to get to a point where you realized you had to make that big decision, and you had to set these vital boundaries for yourself, knowing the toxicity, knowing that you had to value you because no one else was going to.
Exactly.
And I think that's sometimes a hard reality that we have to come to. And so many times women can't get there because they're so beat down. They don't even know that they're worth it. They don't even know that they're valuable enough. What is it in you? You talk about on your website how even as a kid, you noticed the difference in how you were being treated. You noticed the aunt or the grandmother that was nurturing versus the relationships that weren't. So it seems like you had a sense of that. Would you say that sense sustained you to know you're valuable enough to do these other things? How did that play a role at all? Because that is difficult. Narcissists are performers. Narcissists perform beautifully in public. It's, I would imagine, very difficult. I mean, he created this whole script with his own family to make sure you were seen in a way that was beneficial to him. And that is, I mean, that's a narcissist calling card. So
absolutely.
You're really living in, unless someone else can see the narcissist in him, which they're champions at making sure that nobody outside of their realm does.
Right.
You're really living on an island. So it takes a lot of inner oomph to find the just courage to rise out of that.
Right. And, you know, people ask me that a lot of the time. I will be eternally grateful, you know, and I don't want to get into a whole spiritual conversation, but I feel like there are some powers that be somewhere that just ensured I had whatever I needed. Because yes, it was a great grandma. My great grandma, when I was born to my mother, so to give everyone a little bit of this backstory that will be in a book I'm releasing later this year, Mom was she was a teenager who got pregnant with me. So I was an oops, but she did not want me. And I want to people to understand, immediately after I was born, she had her tubes tied. And yes, they did do that in the 1970s here in the US. 17 years old, tied her tubes right up, didn't even, blink at it. So I'm not sure she wanted children, but she did not treat me in any such way. She has been very open about she would have adopted me out. She would have had an abortion if she could have. Well, to speak to how much she didn't want me, grandma and great grandma got together and made a pact with her that great grandma would take care of me from birth on, and grandma would get a job and pay for my expenses. So basically, mom didn't have to worry about me at all, but they were not going to let their only granddaughter, I was the only grandchild born so far to them. Mm-hmm. They were not going to let me be just, out in the world without, being part of this family. So I am grateful that for the few years that I was with great grandma, she was, in my heart of hearts, she's my mother. She was the one that fed me, put me to bed, rocked me when I cried. All my early memories, and I have many of them, and I'm so grateful for them, are with her. She was a mother to me. My mother, I knew she was my mother. It's kind of weird, but there was no relationship. Even when she would come and visit, there was no closeness. There was no extra affection. There was no sense in my head that she was significant. She was just like any of the other aunts, uncles, or cousins, that was there. And hi, nice to see you. But when she got married, I was 7 years old when she married the man that she is still married to.
Jesus.
Somebody decided, I don't know who, honestly, that I should go be with her because she had, so, this is my next book. Like I said, it's all about being raised by narcissists. I don't know which one of them was a bigger one, mother or her husband, but she married a much older man who already had a house in the suburbs, who had divorced his wife to be with her, probably because she looked a lot better on his arm than his current wife, being much younger and everything. But I was that extra baggage that he didn't want any more than she did. But the family just thought I'd be better off because here he was, this Caucasian man with, living in the suburbs, middle to upper class, got some money. He has a car, the things. Well, you know what? I'm 48 and I can tell you things don't mean crap to me.
Yeah.
Things repulse me, actually.
Yeah. And things don't love you back
things
or care for you.
Things do not love you. And that's the thing. I was raised almost every single day. My mother was still we have no relationship anymore, but still as a child, just very emotionally neglectful and detached, always criticizing me if I had feelings or if I remember begging for her love and begging or seeking approval. I was the overachiever. I was honor roll. They were going to bump me up 2 grades. I was first chair violist in 2 different symphonic orchestras. I was doing things that other kids weren't even capable of at my age. And that's not to be conceited. It's just to show I just wanted her to look at me and say I'm proud of you. Oh my gosh, you're my daughter. Amazing. I love you. Never. Do you know I'm 48 to this day? Never once has either of them said they were proud of me. Not once.
Wow.
Not once in my life.
Wow.
But the killer was her husband. Her husband, who I hate to say, she kind of pushed me off on him. She was busy working and doing her thing. So I was left with him most of the time. And this started when I was about 5 or 6 years old. I shouldn't have to pay for another man's child. Why are you eating toast? That toast is going to give you hips like a middle-aged woman. You're going to look fat like your grandma if you eat that bowl of pasta. You're not smart enough. You're not competent enough to do that. I don't care if you wrote a fugue on the piano. I'm not paying for any more lessons. That's not my responsibility. It was all these, it's just diminish, demean, insult. He would go so far as to tell me my mother didn't love me and nobody would ever love me. And so let's just say by about 11, 12 years old, I had already had it in my head, internalized that I was a burden, I was a bother. And honestly, I didn't know why I existed. There were suicidal thoughts, never any attempts, but certainly thoughts. Still struggle with that to this day. This stuff just does not leave you, because as much as I knew it was wrong, because great grandma didn't treat me that way, my uncles didn't treat me that way. I had friends, I'd go play at my little friends' houses. Their parents didn't say those things to them. So that's where it was. And that's where I knew I could see it was just directed at me. But what does that say to a little girl? What does that say to a preteen and a teenager that says there's something wrong with me? I am defective. I am deficient. And like I said, to this day, it's a struggle. It's a very conscious effort. And I think I will be healing from that my entire life. And I have come leaps and bounds from where I was even a year ago or 2 years ago. Yeah. But boy, that's just hard to shake. But I think whatever that was in me that always knew it was wrong, again, in my marriage, I was seeing, I mean, I went to my son's t-ball games. I went to these things at school. I could see how other men talk to their, and I'm very aware of these things too. I notice verbiage and I notice body language and I notice and you know, nobody else's husband was calling them an effing see you next Tuesday like it was their name. Nobody else's husband was calling them a whore all the time, or, you know, it's just, so I could see it again, but it was just me. It was just me. But I think with my ex-husband, it was different because, you know, this wasn't necessarily my mother labeling me. It was this man that, I tried so hard to love him, and I did love him, and I just wanted him to love me back. And I tried with him, but I just realized I had to just decide if it was him or me at the end. Was he worth being sick for? Was he worth? Because I put it in these terms. I have a son, and he's going to be 21 this month. I'm very excited. But from the second he came out of me, I would lay my life down for him. No question, without even thinking about it. So that's kind of where my thought process was when my health failed, is this man, yes, he's my husband, but is he worth my life? Yeah. And I couldn't even come to a maybe on that. It just, no, it wasn't. He wasn't. Yeah. And it was sad because I wanted him to be. I really did. But it just wasn't it. And that's when I opened my eyes and saw things for what they really were. And my next question was, can we repair this? Well, unfortunately, one person cannot repair a relationship two people are in. That was the demise with my mother and I. I wanted a relationship. She blatantly told me she did not want to be my mother. So, I mean, you can't have, one person doing it for everybody. So it was time to move on. And I always say it is what it is, and it doesn't make anything better. But I think acceptance is the first step in beginning to heal, because if you don't accept something, if I hadn't accepted the fact that he was doing these things that were causing me so much harm and choosing to do so, by the way, and that's a key as well. When somebody is choosing to harm you and knowing you are unhealthy and know that you are sick because of stress, and they are still inflicting you, with intentional harm, you got to just call it what it is. And once you see it, unfortunately, you can't unsee that stuff. So that's when things started to change.
We talk a lot about here on taking care of our emotional health, our physical health, our mental health. You've given prime examples of what happens to your body when you are in a constant state of hypervigilance, high stress. The day you're in, your body believes and is telling you are in danger all the time. There is a cost to that. There is a cost to living in that state. And our bodies, so many times I think our bodies are seen as being against us when actually they're just ringing the alarm bells.
Yes.
Ringing the alarm bells, trying to get your attention. And I think it's so important. You said something earlier about that persistence in finding the healthcare providers. They're going to see you, listen to you, work with you, connect the dots. Women, and especially women from in general, but women coming from abusive situations, sometimes that healthcare provider is the only like outlet you have to see the signs of what is happening to you. But so many times women's voices historically are minimized. It's getting better. We're talking about it more, but it is still, and I have my own experience with this, not like yours, but I have my own experience of stored up emotions, trauma, whatnot, not being dealt with, and having to continue to work to find the right doctor who would connect all the dots with me, who would not just throw a pill at my blood pressure and not dive into, why is this woman in her late 40s having, or early 50s having high blood pressure? What? That doesn't make sense. She's physically fit. She eats well. So women fight for those. You deserve that. Find those people that will work with you and connect the dots. I think that's so powerful that you mentioned that, and that you not just, they say something, you're like, okay, don't doubt yourself. Trust that inner knowing. And so sometimes it is verbally, physically beaten out of you. And you've given prime examples of how that happened, but you had it in you. I think sometimes just those sprinkles of examples you see can be enough to be like, keep the alerts on of like, something's not right here. And I need to keep asking questions, moving forward, putting one foot in front of another. So thank you for sharing that. That's so powerful and such an example of what happens and how our bodies respond when we're continually in these situations where we're not releasing it. There's no way out. We're not surrounded by healthy people, healthy systems, healthy situations. And you were able to have that, that just gumption within you to set those boundaries, to identify the connectors. You knew like there's something going on here, and keep finding those doctors that will care for you the way you need to. I think that's so powerful. And I appreciate you sharing that. How we can support ourselves and other women in living unapologetically. You're doing that. You made the determination that you were worth it, that this person was not worth your life, that you had something else to live for, and that you deserved to do that. You deserved to go out there, get as much of your health back as you could, be in healthy relationships. That metaphor you used earlier, getting out of the weeds and the flowers rising around you and welcoming them in. And then I can understand from hearing that how that just fills you up with, I got to let other women know about this. I got to let other women know what's possible, that they don't have to exist like this.
It's so true. And the responsibility for me, I mean, it definitely stemmed from my health because, there's that cliche, stress can kill you. I've heard it, but I never realized it was actually true. And so I wanted people to understand because there's so much more to it too. And again, even now after everything, there are still pieces of that puzzle that I'm just now finding that I'm like, oh my gosh. Yeah. For example, in writing the book about my childhood, I was remembering, I probably remember from about the age of 7 years old. That's little. Yeah. I would have terrible migraines and stomach aches all the time. I mean, even through high school, I remember constantly going to the nurse, with both arms folded over my stomach, just kind of keeled over. And she'd give me that little red and white Star Mint because they couldn't give you anything else, and go lay down. But I mean, those are two basic signs of stress and abuse.
Yeah.
I mean, we need for school nurses to hear this and for teachers to hear this. If there's that kid in your class that is going to the nurse all the time with stomachs and headaches, don't just say, oh, what's wrong with them? Maybe they have a brain tumor. Maybe something's going on at home. Maybe something is happening people don't know about, because I wish somebody had that in their head, because err on the side of caution. Better to ask and find out you were wrong than to know that you were seeing something, witnessing it. It was happening right in front of you. But even now, I'm at that age, I'm going through that change. And I am still finding 2 weeks ago, I met with a hormone specialist, because I'm like, and everything's going on. That's a whole other podcast too. Going through the change.
It is. But, menopause and perimenopause. Woo.
But you know what? Add on to that, the trauma that I've been through. We actually ended up in a discussion. I ended up putting a puzzle piece together that it apparently I am currently completely depleted in progesterone. I thought I was having estrogen problems. It was progesterone. And we don't have to have a whole hormone talk, but the key to this is, guess what can cause progesterone to deplete? When you have high cortisol. Yeah. And you know what happens if you don't have progesterone, if it's depleted like it is in me, not just irregular periods and all that, migraines, miscarriages. And that was the piece for me. In my book that's out about my former marriage, I only discussed one miscarriage, but I had multiple. I had, I believe, 3 or 4 before my son was born and the same number after. And now I am like, it's because of the progesterone. It was depleted from the cortisol. And I never knew it because they couldn't, the doctors were like, you don't have endometriosis. We can't find anything wrong. We don't know why you're miscarrying. We don't know, Yeah. And now I know. Now I know after all these years why I was miscarrying. And I don't, it's just still stunning. Obviously, I'm a little speechless about it because it's just this ongoing thing where you think, okay, he financially drained us and, oh, he's threatening you. And you can't go to the Dollar General to even buy cat food without him accusing you of screwing somebody in the back alley and all these random things that happen, swinging a crowbar at me. And, you don't think, oh, maybe that's the reason my progesterone is depleted. Like you don't put those things together. No. So it's like this mystery that I always refer to the puzzle, but it's like, I'm still there. I think it's mostly together and I have figured it most out, but boy, it's so complex and it's so difficult, to find that one piece and what's going on. And now that I've been taking progesterone, it's amazing. I mean, obviously I'm not trying to have any more children, so I don't want to miscarry either, but my body is balancing and I'm sleeping at night. My sleep was messed up because of the high cortisol and all these things. Yeah. So yes, when you said like your body is telling you, yes, your mental state is absolutely reflected in your body. So I tell people, listen to it because it is screaming at you when it gets to that point. So don't deny the migraine you get every couple weeks or the stomach aches you always have, or for me, tension in the shoulders, all that kind of stuff. There's something there and that's something telling you got to pay more attention. And just one more note on this is that, we talk about mental health in this society. And when you say mental health, people automatically, I guarantee you the first word they think is crazy. Like, you're unstable somehow.
Yes.
That is not what mental health is. What is physical health? Physical health is if you want some muscles, if you want to keep your bones healthy and your muscles, you're lifting weights, you're out power walking, or you can be a grandma at the mall doing your walk, whatever. You're exercising, you're putting the right foods in your body, right? Mental health is the same thing. It's just basically giving your mind nutrition, giving it the good stuff instead of the crap. Forgive my language.
Yeah,
but,
no, absolutely.
So we have to start thinking about mental health, at least where we're concerned. We can't change society all at once, but where we're concerned, stop feeling like you have there's this stigma. It's okay to have anxiety. I have it every damn day. And I've learned to manage it better in some situations than others, but that is what mental health is. I can't lift a weight for my brain, but I can learn to stop and say, okay, I see myself doing this thing that usually isn't productive. And I mean, really, who wants to feel this way or react like this or whatever? I'm going to choose to react a different way or do something different. And let's see how that works. Oh, that feels a lot better. That is mental health. It's okay. And it's okay if you're bipolar or have ADHD or whatever, whatever it is, you're still you. It does not define you, but be aware of it.
Yeah.
And lift those mental weights too. Be mindful of it and be mindful of improving and getting the information just like you would with your body.
That was really good. Thank you for that. That was such a good example of those tools, those mental weights. And because, and I think it is changing and getting better, but it's just part of your health, your mental health, your emotional health, your physical health, your spiritual health. They're all realms in your health, your sexual health. I mean, all these things are realms in your health, and you have to deal with them. And like, okay, what tools do I need? What needs healing? What needs a different approach? How can I fuel this? How can I feed this? What is my self-talk doing? How is that affecting me, impacting me? Because that's a big one. So thank you for that's such a great example of that. Thank you so much for that. And that's just a key example of what you're doing to help women live unapologetically too. You're offering these resources. You wrote your book, and it was so interesting to me. Your book started as a journal you had hidden under your couch. And to me, that was almost a form of self-care for you and writing that down. But now that resource is available to other women. And so again, another example of you helping them to show up and get to a space of living unapologetically as you are with all of these layers. And I think that's so important. And now you've got these other, so you continue to be a resource in that way. So thank you for that. That is powerful.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's important. But that when did the journal start? Because that's so fascinating to me. Sometimes. Well,
yeah, it's not like I just decided I'm going to have a journal. Like I had a diary when I was 13, This is actually this is an aspect of narcissistic abuse I think most people can relate to. We call it gaslighting. And for people that don't really understand what it is, it actually originated in an old movie where the husband was turning off the lights and turning them back on, kind of flickering them. And the wife would say, oh, what's happening with the lights? Is there some power, surge or what's going on? And the husband would sit there with his newspaper and say, I don't know what you're talking about. The lights have been on the whole time. And that's what gaslighting is when somebody is negating your reality. They are telling you that what you are seeing, hearing, what you're experiencing is not what really is.
Yeah.
And why do narcissists do this? Why does anybody do this? Because they don't want you to see the truth.
No.
They are trying to recreate your reality. But what they are doing is making you question yourself. Honestly, we call it crazy making. They are trying to make you feel as crazy as they call you, because every one of them calls you crazy. That's just a standard. But it can be so damaging. And so that's what was happening, except it had been happening for 25 years. And then even my whole life before that, my mother, the ultimate gaslighter of, wow. So after 45 years of people gaslighting me, I'm going to be honest with you. I started to question. I'm like, okay, my mother, my stepfather, my husband, I'm the common denominator here. Yeah. Everyone is saying I'm the one that is delusional, that conversation didn't happen and that I'm misinterpreting, this and that I never heard that. So I started writing down, and I mean, I actually still have it right here. It was just a plain old, notebook that actually my son, when they come home from school at the end of a school year with all their extra stuff, I tore the pages he had written on out of it, and I took it from his closet because I needed it to be unsuspecting. But what I did was just whenever my ex would say something that was disturbing, or if there was an unpleasant occurrence, unfortunately, there was domestic violence involved and what have you, I would write down the date and just a brief, sometimes it was just a couple lines. Sometimes it might be half a page, and I would I had a good memory, believe it or not, but I would write down word for word, or I would write down that text message or what was said in that email right away. And I would hide it under the couch cushion in the basement because I thought, okay, what's the likelihood he's going to go under the couch cushion in the basement? And what's the likelihood that he would see an old notebook from our son's fourth grade and think to look in it for anything?
Right.
So that was my way of protecting myself and hiding my truth, literally and figuratively.
Right.
But when he would then come to me and say, I never said that, I would just, okay. And then I might have to go do laundry or something and pull my journal out and go to that. Okay, this is word for word what I wrote down, he said. So it was my way of telling myself and reiterating to myself, no, this is what you heard, Dana. This is what you saw. This is what he emailed you or what he texted you. And then I could go to my phone so it was my way of justifying my truth and knowing that I wasn't nuts, because I try to be self-aware. I am not I am okay with being flawed. But I wanted to be very aware if there was something wrong with my perception. If I was delusional, I just wanted to make sure that I could go get help for that. But I was finding that no, I was in fact being gaslighted, not just by him, but I kept a similar journal for, what my mother and stepfather were doing to me. But, until that relationship just came to a screeching halt, and we've been estranged since. But that's where my book came out of, because honestly, when I got out of that marriage and COVID happened, coincidentally during this time, and I had some time on my hands, I was like, no, you know what? Women need to know about this. People need to know this is happening, and they need to be aware, because if I hadn't kept that journal, I might be in a loony bin right now. And I don't mean any disrespect by saying those words. I just try to use humor sometimes to lighten things up. But it's really disturbing, because the other part of this is that very, very early on in my relationship with my ex-husband, he always calling me crazy. I'm crazy. Or he would say, you're crazy, you're crazy. He would start telling me I was bipolar. He was calling me bipolar so often that the first time he left me, because there were multiple times, he had me so convinced I was bipolar that I went to a psychiatrist and I answered. The test is they ask you some questions, and I was answering them all correctly because, or in alignment with a bipolar diagnosis. Right. I went home with 2 mood stabilizers that I was on for the next 17 years.
Wow.
And then I had my other doctor giving me Xanax. So it was very disturbing to me to find that at the end of that relationship, even the psychiatrist had, I haven't been on those medications for a few years now. And I'm emotional. I'm actually feeling, I was like a crazy zombie. Yeah. I think that I probably was in that relationship for that long, partially because I was able to numb myself and just kind of tune it out, so to speak. It's not that I was oblivious or unfeeling, but I was unfazed because those drugs kept me so even. And so I wasn't as reactive more of the time than not than I could have been off of them. But
Sure.
it's very sad. And that's one thing that people need to realize too, and don't worry about the stigma. But, that last conversation with the psychiatrist, he had no idea. He had no idea what kind of a situation I had been in. And so we had to wean me off to see, but he's like, bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, all these are mood disorders, but trauma presents, PTSD. This presents with many of the same symptoms, many of the same behaviors, but it's trauma-based. It's not a mood disorder. So, there is that differentiation, because I know that I've met so many people, women that have reached out that's, I have ADHD. I'm depressed. I'm bipolar. And the interesting thing is they're all on the same gene. They are all in the same gene. It's just how they're manifested, how they are exhibited, and who diagnoses you. But, again, this is one of those situations where you have to be your own advocate and help your doctor kind of put the pieces of that puzzle together to figure out what's going on, because he had no idea. My poor doctor had no idea until 17 years later that I had an abusive childhood, that I had been in abuse. He knew I wasn't happy in my marriage, but he had no idea. We would have probably treated it much differently had I known. So,
and that's another great example of bringing in all that information, all that stuff that they can't know unless you share it. And we don't realize, because we haven't really started talking about it. I think those connections until probably the last 5 to 10 years, 15 years, maybe, wait a minute, I need to share all these things, because that all is an informer of why these things may be coming up for me. It's so interconnected. So thank you for sharing that, because it's really powerful and a good reminder to us. Bring all that in when you go in for your yearly checkup or whatever it is. Bring all that information in. It's all part of the package and gives your doctors more information. And if you don't like their response to it, it's okay to look elsewhere and find someone who will listen to all of it. I think that's really important. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Talk to me about the importance of, you had to really kind of find your why, find your value in all of this. Talk to me about how that informed and helped you make these very important moves to get out of these relationships, set these boundaries, see yourself as valuable enough and worthy enough to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting, actually, that's a tough one, because the value and the worth, ironically for me, were never there, because again, in my specific situation, my worthiness and my value was basically raped from me. It was taken from me as a child. So I didn't have that. And the other part of that is that, I've encountered a lot of people, and I'm sure everyone else has too. Oh, well, if my husband cheated on me, I'd be out of there. If my husband, shot a gun outside, I'd be out of there. All these things that happen to me, and all those things for a normal person that was raised to have some sense of value and worth would have walked out. I would have walked out of that relationship 3 weeks into it, when we were just dating and he threw something across the room at me. I would have left when he swung that crowbar at my head, because if I hadn't ducked, I'd probably be dead. I would have left, all these different times. There were a million. I mean, it was funny when the publisher read my first manuscript. She's like, "You keep saying you're done like 50 times." And I'm like, "But I was. I thought I was done. I should have been done all those times, but I wasn't. I wasn't, because I didn't have that value and worth." So I always say to people, you may not even know. If somebody had asked me back in that relationship, what's the deal breaker? What's the thing? What's that one thing that if he does this, you're out of there? No questions asked. For a lot of people, it is cheating or domestic violence and all these other things, financial. There's a lot of stuff to financial stuff, All of those things are normal and justifiable reasons that I apparently tolerated. I excused them. I enabled it, obviously, and I tolerated it.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea what my deal breaker was. I might have given you an answer, but I didn't know what it was. And I'm betting most people don't know, because I can go to a mother down the street right now with her 4 kids and her beautiful home and her 2 dogs and whatever, and say, okay, you said you were going to leave if your husband cheats on you. Well, he's been screwing 10 ladies every night down at the local bar. I'm exaggerating, obviously, but would she leave? She's got 4 kids to think about. She's a homemaker. How's she going to pay the mortgage? Are they going to split the dogs, each take one? I mean, I'm just talking, but you have to look at things reasonably. What is that deal breaker though? For me, apparently it was my health, because my health was all I had, and I barely had it. So that apparently was my deal breaker. What somebody else's is going to be a very personal thing. We all have our life experiences that bring us to where we are. We all have that one thing, but again, we might not know what it is, but you find it when you get to it. There just gets to be that point. And I think this happens in friendships too, and coworker relationships, and even in families, where that person, you didn't even know that line was there, but boy, when they cross it, it deeply affects you to the point where you're like, no, this is not okay with me. It's so not okay. Like, we cannot even have a relationship anymore. But I think when that happened, and when I realized in that process of putting together, like, okay, my health is not worth this man. This man, in turn, thinking about the relationship, obviously does not care about me, because he is still inflicting harm on me, knowing that I'm, ill, and it's a result of our lifestyles, we'll call it nicely. That was the realization, again, of the reality of the relationship. And once I saw that, I couldn't defend it. I couldn't excuse it, enable it, or tolerate it, or all these things I had been doing. And I didn't necessarily develop my sense of worthiness or value right then, but I realized, sort of like being your own advocate. And I had to be my own advocate then. I had to be the one to prop myself back up. It's like somebody had pushed me down, and nobody was helping me back up. I had to stand back up myself. And I think once I knew I had to do that, and I was on my own 2 feet, and, again, pulled those weeds, the weeds were gone, and I was watching other flowers that were blooming around me, and like, oh, I can do that too. And I started doing it, just baby steps. I started kind of, you get a little more confident. If anyone's ever watched like a 1.5-year-old, like, they're standing, you let go of them, and they're like, they got their hands out and they're looking at you horrified, and they're wobbling around. But this time they don't fall on their butt. That's kind of what that felt like. But when you're standing up like that and you realize, oh my God, I can do this. Imagine the confidence and the esteem you feel in that moment. Well, if I can do this, then maybe I can move my foot forward. Maybe I don't have to have my feet solidly planted here. I can take that step. Then I can take another step. Next thing you know, I'm running marathons, and it feels really good. And you're like, wow, I didn't know I was capable of this, so that's when your value comes in, and people start seeing, the people that are for you start seeing what you're doing and what you're turning into, and those positive words, that encouragement, all that. I always joke that my husband, now I'm remarried, but I've known him so long, and he was one of those people. I've known his family like 20 years, but he was like a crutch, kind of like I couldn't quite walk on my own yet, but he was like, he wasn't calling me, oh, hey, beautiful, what are you doing today? He's like, oh, you're going to go save the world and write a blog. You're going to write your book, and, you're so smart. And just hearing how other people were seeing me and perceiving me, that I wasn't just this physical, like the trophy wife, like my ex made me feel like I was just supposed to sit there and look pretty and keep my mouth shut and, do his bidding. I was worthy as a human being. I had value. People were reading my book. People were wanting to hear what I had to say. People were seeing what I could do and and then I started seeing it because I mean, really, isn't that what it is to even raise a child? You know, kids don't know what they're capable of until you tell them to. You tell that 1.5-year-old after you let go of them, you can do it. You can stand. Look at you, you know, and then you say, how big are you? So big. Yeah. You know, I was 45, but I had to go, I'm so big.
Yeah.
I could stand in my own, you know, truth and stand in my own, like I didn't have anything holding me back. And that's where the self-worth and the value came in. Now am I this very confident, you know, do I have a healthy self-esteem? It's probably not where it should be, but I've been able to give myself some graces. Like I look and say, I really did a good job with my son, especially in the circumstances he was being raised in. I am so proud of myself and proud of him for who we became and who, you know, as a result of all that and what I did. So I can say, good job, Mom. I can say other things like, wow, oh my gosh, I wrote a book that's published. Amazing. Good job, Dana. But I would have never been able to do that 3 or 4 years ago or any of my other life before that. So I think we have to let go of also of this idea that, you know, it's conceited, you know, to feel a certain way. Because here's the thing, and I will say this, like even about narcissists, we all see these people on social media, right? That look so good. And they're posting pictures in the bikini and the form-fitting dresses and the lashes and the hair and the whole thing every single day. And maybe it's the guys with the 6-pack and they got the muscles, or they're just drop dead gorgeous. And it's just so ridiculous that somebody looks that good and they know how good they look. And we know how good they look, but we get annoyed because they really know how good they look. Yeah. You know, that's true narcissism. Narcissus was a Greek god who liked to look at his handsome reflection in the water. But are they hurting anyone with it? No. They might be annoying you and you might be like, I wish I had that body. And you know, I wouldn't mind going out with a guy with those 6-pack abs, but those 6-pack abs are not going to wipe your butt when you're 80 and need somebody to help you out. Just saying.
They don't love you back.
No, they're good while they last. But that's true narcissism. But definitely what we're talking about when we're talking about this narcissistic abuse are people that ironically feel ugly inside. They are insecure. They often have very low self-esteem and are seeking outwardly to get that admiration and praise that all those, you know, narcissistic people on social media are getting. They want that too, but they don't have the body that, so they get the stuff like we were talking about, or they have the big house, they drive the BMW or the Corvette, and it's the woman with the jewelry and the hair and the clothes and her manicured nails and all this, because all that makes them feel important. It makes them feel superior. And then when they're abusing you, it makes them feel powerful. And there is nothing better than power to make somebody feel like, you know, that they are it, basically.
Yeah. Thank you for that breakdown of that. And I mean, I think it's just that awareness. I mean, it's any one of those things like, oh, ding, 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 ding. Wait a minute here. I know somebody like that. And because I think sometimes we don't break it down that way, but I think too, going back to that journal piece, that turned into an affirmations for you. That turned into like, wait a minute here. I'm not the one. So I think even that role of like finding those ways, like, okay, this is because, and then when you got to that breaking point, you had your value, your health was a value for you. Like, wait a minute.
Oh, absolutely.
Now you've crossed the line. No. And I got a whole book here full of stuff to back, to back me up and remind me that I'm not the one that is, delusional here.
Exactly.
So I think, tracing back those steps and finding those ways to kind of, to remind yourself of that and have those absolutes of like, nope, that line's crossed. No more.
Exactly.
No more. about living out of your own expectations versus others. You've left this stuff behind. So talk to me about your expectations journey, because you went from being in a world where you were required for survival and trying to get affirmation and love back by living out of other people's ridiculous expectations of you, to now you got to that point like, no, not doing this anymore. Going to do this on the way that I know is healthiest and best for me. So talk to me about that transition in your expectations journey.
I don't even know. I never looked at it as expectations. It was dictation. Everything was dictated. Sure. This is how it's going to be. And if you don't conform, you're going to get silent treatment for 3 weeks. And this was even when I was a little girl in my childhood home. Yeah. If you don't say this, I was actually coached what to tell people, to make them believe my stepfather was my biological father. I was, putting Gap clothes, so that I didn't look like I was Hispanic, and stop rolling your R's and all. Dictated. And then in my marriage, it was, you can't this, you can't that, you can't this, this is what you need to do. But they are generally expectations. Yeah. So it was kind of surreal. I remember when my marriage, COVID kind of held things up. So we couldn't get divorced, but we were not living in the same house anymore. Okay. And I'll never forget, I was in the kitchen, and I think it was something just so simple as like what to make for dinner. Because I want people to understand, you want to know how regimented this narcissist had my life. Dinner had to be a meat and 2 sides. The meats could not be the same meat that we have had on any consecutive night. I had to have a rotation of meats, and the sides could not be like 2 carbs or 2, I had to be very careful, and we couldn't have repetition there either. Yeah. It was a very, I actually had to plan meals, which isn't a bad thing, a week ahead of time, and thank God I'm organized. But so I'm standing there, he doesn't live there anymore. And I'm like stunted because I don't have anyone telling me what to do. And mind you, I have a pretty high IQ. I have a college degree. I'm not some, I have a brain in my head. I should be able to know what I want to eat for dinner. And I remember my son, he was 17 at the time, came in the kitchen and looked at me, and he knew me. He knew exactly what was going on. Yeah. And he said, "We don't have to follow the rules anymore, Mom." And I just remember looking at him like, like, how could you say that? But then I'm like, oh, we don't have to follow the rules. You know what I had for dinner that night? I had a whole pint of butter pecan ice cream. You want to know how good that was? Yeah. Do you want to know how good that ice cream tasted?
Oh my gosh.
That is how I broke free. And that was it. It was just realizing it. But I didn't even realize it. It took my son saying it out loud. But gosh, it's so hard. And to this day, I've been out of that marriage for 4 years now. I'm remarried, but it's silly things like my husband will come home and say, "Oh my gosh, it's so cold in the house. You don't have the heat on. Why didn't you turn the thermostat on?" Well, I wasn't allowed to. I wasn't allowed to touch the thermostat in my childhood home or in my home with my previous husband. You cannot tell me, I'm 48 years old, I will not touch a damn thermostat because of the fear that was instilled in me for 45 years of that. So it still affects me, but I felt it's silly, but it's just like having that butter pecan ice cream where, a time came after that conversation where I was feeling, like the temperature needed to be adjusted, but I have a space heater here. I have fans. I'm one of those, I won't touch the thermostat. I boldly walked to the thermostat. And I remember standing there, I'm looking at it. And here, look at me. I'm even breathing now. I can do this. And people don't get this is silly, but it was a huge thing for me to put it on. Oh my gosh. But you know what the beauty was? I knew my current husband would be glad that I did. He wants me to be comfortable.
Yeah.
He wants me to be comfortable. He wants me to feel at home here. He would never dictate or tell me I couldn't or make me sacrifice, or because he actually loves me. And I had such a skewed idea of what love was. And thank God this man knew me so long and saw through me and was willing to be on this roller coaster of a healing journey to help me get past some of these things. But it's just the little things. People go to therapy and pay thousands of dollars and read books and listen. And I'm not dismissing that. But at the end of the day, to make any one of these changes in your life starts with you, and just those the little wins. You just have to take them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you said silly, but it's not silly. Those little things that are ingrained in us.
Yeah.
And there's such a deep consequence if we stray from that. And that's entrenched in you. And it took years for that to become entrenched. And it takes time for it to, there may always be some triggers you have.
Oh, absolutely.
Because of the deep entrenchment, but it's recognizing, wait a minute, that's a trigger. It's not truth. This is what it's linked to. And I'm safe now. And I can do this.
Yes.
Because you got to retrain your nervous system that you're safe.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's a whole thing in itself.
That is a whole thing in itself, but it's key because, and what you said, it's interesting. I put a post on social media not that long ago, just, because of this idea of love that we sometimes have that leads us into these relationships. And I said, what does love mean to you? Give me one word. And my word that I shared for me love to me is safety. When I feel safe, when I feel safe that I can speak freely, when I am safe that I can feel and express my feelings, when I feel safe in my environment, I'm not tense and anxious, and, when I can breathe and just be free, I feel safe. When I don't feel threatened, when I feel like I can turn a thermostat on or eat whatever I want for dinner, I feel safe. That is love to me. And everyone feels love differently, but it's something that I think if you acknowledge, and I challenge everyone, ask yourself, what is that? What is love to you? Because you might find it's something that maybe isn't like this fantasy idea that the movies and TV have given us. It's not roses and it's not 6-pack abs, coming to meet your family for Christmas. It's not, it's a lot of other very real things. And when you find that, and I'm so grateful that despite my past, that I have been able to be in a relationship with somebody, like I said, who shows me what real love is and shows me that, okay, I'm going to help you. I'm going to be your crutch and show you how to come walk with the rest of the world that, has had it a little easier and doesn't have all these hindrances, but we're going to be there for each other and we're going to make it work. And that alone is safety, to know that you're not being judged, rejected, abandoned, criticized, ridiculed. Safety. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it is. It is. Thank you for that. Accepting the layered aspects of ourselves. You've had to do that. So talk to me about your layers journey and getting I did the best with what I could at what I had at the time. Totally see how I got there. And also going to leave that in the past and heal and move forward and do differently.
This is a real simple one for me. And it's taken me a long time to get there, but I realized that one, I cannot change the past. I go back to the Lion King, when the monkey hits Simba over the head and he goes, ow, why'd you do that? And the monkey says, well, it doesn't matter. It's in the past. You can't change the past. It happened. Crap happens. And I'm not a person that says, let it go, move on. but you have to move forward into the future, because if you live in the past and if you choose to live in that misery and that angst and whatever all that muck is, that's what your life is going to be. And I don't believe for a second anyone really wants to live that way. So it's just a matter of saying, okay, all of that happened. What am I going to do with it? I'm a big cliche person. I always joke now that I'm making lemonade with my lemons. I'm just throwing a little vodka in there because really, I have been through some stuff. Yeah. And I am just trying to take it and do better. Take even my mistakes, because let's be real. I wasn't a perfect angel. I didn't always react the best or behave the best or do the right thing. But like you said, I did the best I could in those circumstances. Right. There are absolutely regrets. We all have them, but I cannot change them. So I had to learn to stop and say, and sometimes out loud, Dana, stop being hard on yourself. We're all human. Yeah. We're not perfect. And part of the human experience is making mistakes. And, it was funny, even when I started writing my book, I was excited to tell my son. And he said, what are you writing your book about? And I was like, oh, I didn't think about what I would tell him. So I said, it's about relationships, because really it is. Yeah. And he looked at me like, you're divorced. Like, who the hell are you to write a book about relationships? And I said to him, you know what, kid, you'll learn, but you can't learn until you make mistakes. You can't learn until you fail. That is where learning takes place. That is where growth takes place. So everybody needs to look at their past, forgive themselves. I don't believe necessarily in this stuff about you have to forgive people and all that. That's a whole other podcast too. But I believe in, you got to forgive yourself. Give yourself a break. You did what you did. Maybe you made some bad choices, bad decisions. You probably made some good ones too, and did some good things. But whatever happened, happened. Take it, learn from it. If there's something you want to improve, figure out how to do that. Something you want to do differently, figure out how to do it differently. You want to behave or react differently. I mean, I don't like having panic attacks. I don't like being triggered. I don't like getting dysregulated. So I made motions to learn about it and effectively change it so my life can improve. But the improvement is in the future. And you're not going to, if you're constantly looking behind you, you're not going to see that future. So you just got to face forward, say, it happened, it sucked, moving on.
I love that. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. There was so, it's that powerful piece of forgiving yourself. I mean, it just really is, it matters. And you start there. And I think we underestimate the power of that sometimes and what we do to ourselves, but being aware of that is so important, and that you move forward learning that. Be curious. Don't be judgmental. Be curious. And that's what I've had to switch to remove the judgment from myself, is to instead get curious. And when I get curious, I start asking myself the right questions, which then projects me forward. And so I think that's a really powerful tool. Thank you so much. In summary, in living out feel, finding empowerment, embracing layers, which you have done, talk to me about how this has affected your relationship with yourself and your relationship with others. I mean, you've talked about the fact that you put those boundaries up you needed. You've got new relationships, people that value you. You said that earlier, and that's so important to be surrounded with people that value you and valuing yourself. And it starts with valuing you. And then you will then attract the people that also, and you teach people how to treat you in so many ways with what you do and don't allow and live out of. So talk to me about that, being able to, I think it's so beautiful that you were able to find this new relationship, this healthy relationship with someone who sees you, values you, wants to be on a journey with you. And so talk to me about
there's a lot process there, but it's interesting because I feel like when I thought everything was over and I was so alone, I had never been. I was just made to believe that I was. And, again, we go back to that garden and seeing those flowers. There's a lot to say. I'm just trying to figure out how to say it most succinctly. It's a matter of just deciding what you want your future to look like. One of the best things I did for myself was, coming out of that marriage, I started to see how it wasn't benefiting me and that I had made the right choice.
Yeah.
Immediately after the divorce, my physical symptoms literally just dissipated almost instantly.
Wow.
I felt like a whole new person. I had gone from having to wear backpack oxygen every day to I went over a year without needing it at all. And I wasn't under that constant stress. And like I said, that I finally was weaned off of medications I should have never been on in the first place because so things just started falling into the place they should have been naturally. Yeah. But all of that opened my eyes to what I had basically been subscribing myself to. I never would, I don't want to offend anybody by saying it's a choice to be, we don't choose to be abused but we also have to understand that we always have the power to not get involved in those relationships or, to get ourselves out as safely as we can when we are able to. But I think it was kind of that hindsight. It's always 2020, but seeing that things were improving, I felt more righteous about my decision and I felt resolved about it. I didn't need to have any conversations or, resolve any feelings because
it was manifesting itself right in front of you.
It literally was. And I think that when you are walking down the right path, it naturally will just all fall into place. And even the last thing I ever thought I would do was get married. Lord help me. I wasn't trying to date. There was no way in hell. I thought I was like, I'm going to I was going to move to the mountains of North Carolina, be by myself. But again, it's one of those natural things like, oh, I've known your family 20 years. Oh, you want to go for a walk? You want to go for a car ride? We're going to go have and then it was just like, shh. And what I'm trying to say with all this, I guess, is my general advice to people. And this is with all things in life is listen to your gut. Yes. Listen to your gut, because I'm going to tell you what, the first time I met my stepfather, I think I was 3 or 4 years old. I actually remember the first time I met him. He was smiling. He was seemingly nice. Something about him. I couldn't put my finger on it. I was a little kid and who would listen to me. He repulsed me. I mean, I just felt like he was vile and the energy, whatever, I just did not want any part of him. And that turned out not very well. My ex-husband, first time I met him, I had the Lost in Space robot with his coily arms waving, danger, danger. I was like, oh no, he reminded me instantly of my stepfather. Why then? Why? Because I was desperate, because I was a codependent, because I was so starving for love. And he gave me that one little crumb of affection and lured me like, like you give a dog a treat. And I followed, wagging my tail, saying, okay, whatever you say, sir. And that was 25 years of my life. But, in the same respect, here I am outside of those relationships realizing, oh, wait. If I just listen to myself and listen to my gut, I won't go astray. Everything's going to go lie naturally where it would. And when things are organic, when relationships organically develop in that way, when you don't try to force them or enter into them under these, I don't want to call them false pretenses, but, this codependent stuff, this people pleasing and all that stuff that led me into bad situations before, I wasn't letting it anymore. And so that was sort of setting a boundary with myself first. Saying, no more of this, Dana. We're going to start listening to how we feel. This person, can't put my finger on it, but just doesn't feel like the right person. This person right here, I'm drawn to them. There is something really magnetic there. Or and I'm talking about family, romantic, other parents of your kids' friends and people at work, people in the community. If we just start to listen to our gut, I just feel like it won't lead you astray, because now that I listen to mine and kind of rely on it, and I'm going to go so far as to say part of that boundary is allowing it. It's not just stopping, it's moving forward in things. Yeah. To say, to give yourself permission to be and to do, to say, okay, there isn't that boundary there, that like, I don't have to stop just here because it makes everybody else comfortable. I can be all I'm meant to be because that's what I'm feeling in my heart I need to do.
And the beauty in trusting that is so powerful. Thank you for that. Because we are not told that, even if we grew up in semi-healthy environments. That's not the narrative that's out there in so many spaces. So thank you for that, because I'm a firm believer in the same thing. Trust that we were given that to guide us and direct us. So thank you so much for that. So good.
Absolutely.
We are down to the rapid fire. Name 5 activities that nourish you.
Oh, breathing. By the way, it does release cortisol when you breathe. So breathe. Yeah. It feels good too. Yeah. I'm a big walker. Sometimes if I feel overwhelmed, stressed, I just need to go take a walk. Even if it's just walking around my house a few times, just get outside. Nature would be the third thing. Again, I mean, I'm very fortunate. My husband dug a pond. We have fish and ducks and birds and all kinds of things going out. But do it. Fourth thing is love. Be open. Just because you've gotten hurt, even for me, I've been hurt a million times over. But I think being open to love and just being you. And that would be the last one, is just be who you are. Because what I have come to find out is I wasn't enough for a lot of people, but I was too much for some, but for the right people, I was enough. And it's okay to be who you are.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So good. And 5 words on how you want to feel the next 6 months.
Oh, I want to feel more relaxed. I'm a busy girl. I want to feel more firm in who I am, because as authentically as I live, I feel like, unfortunately, I need to follow my advice. I lived so much in the past, with everything that I stand for, that I want to live in the present. And I feel like I lose a lot of that. And I have to find a balance. And I guess balance would be my next one, honestly. Yeah. Balancing that so-called work and real life, because I feel like, unfortunately, a lot of stuff gets lost with me and my husband and just things going on because I'm busy trying to save other women from what I have been through. So I just need to learn how to balance that so I can do it, not for everybody else, but to make me happy, so I feel less pressure. Yeah. I don't know how many I gave you. Words, happy. Isn't that an obvious one? And see, this is the past catching up with me, because for a long time, I didn't even realize that I deserved to be happy. So it might be 4th or 5th on the list, but happy. I mean, who doesn't want to be? Yeah. I just want to experience joy and live life and just be.
No, I love that. Oh, Dana, thank you so much for this. Such a rich, full conversation. I appreciate your honesty and your authenticity in this. Tell people where they can follow you, find you. You've got a book out. You're working on more. So tell us about this. And all of this, listeners, will be on our website, embracinglayers.com. Go to the resources page. Look for Dana's name and episode. You'll find all that here, but share a little bit about that with us.
Thank you so much. Yes. My website, danasdiaz.com. That would be my go-to link for my book is there, or you can go straight to Amazon. It's called Gasping for Air, The Stranglehold of Narcissistic Abuse. And it discusses the narcissistic relationship I had with my ex. I do have 2 more books coming out. So sign up for my email list or follow me on Facebook or Instagram so you get updates on the next 2, which are a prequel and a sequel. So the prequel is about my childhood being raised by 2 narcissists, and the sequel kind of wraps everything up, brings it full circle, how those narcissists from the past still affect me to this day, even though I have no contact with any of them. And then I hate to say there was a newer narcissist even after I got out of my relationship with my husband, and somebody that had been in my life for a very, very long time that you'd think I would see it by now, but I think I'm so hopeful and I just failed to see it. And so, but it talks about all this stuff, the healing and that mental journey and the physical journey and all this stuff that we really talked about here. So I'm very excited to be able to share those. But definitely social media. I post every day. Sometimes we laugh and joke about the things we've been through, and sometimes we share information and resources. But definitely, there's something there for everybody. If you've ever been in a toxic relationship, have had a history of abuse in your childhood, abuse in a marriage, domestic violence, kind of covers all of these things, because believe me, I get it. You are not alone. You're not crazy. I am vouching for you, and I'm glad you're here. And thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for this today. And audience, know those resources there. Check them out. If you don't need them, someone you know might need them. It's so important to be aware. And for those that are teachers and school nurses and healthcare practitioners, this is a really, kind of a reminder. And I know you hear these things to watch for. You might be that lifeline for that kid, for that woman. You just never know. So trust your inner knowing. A lot of times our gut will tell us, and we try to step it down and second guess it. Trust that. But thank you so much, Dana, for your time, for your story, for your courage. Field Podcast audience, we hope you found this helpful. Again, all those resources there for you at embracinglayers.com. Take good care of yourselves. Trust your gut, trust your inner knowing, and have a great week.